Welcome back, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us on this Adventure Box podcast. Another great day when it comes to talking about history. Okay, so we promised you on Monday that we were going to talk about everything else that basically happened from the forming of the United States on for the indigenous people. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Just so you know, everything that we're talking about today and every day with this podcast is thanks to Historical Conquest. That's right. I'm the CEO of Historical Conquest, Zach Edwards. This is my company. I would love to hear what you have to what you think. If you have any questions, so please don't hesitate to put them in the comments below. Okay, here we go. So today we're going to be exploring the impact of the formation of the United States on the Native Americans. Yes, I did say Native Americans now, not just indigenous, because now it is the Americas. It's been named. These are natives to that land. They're native to the land. Does not mean they're primitive or anything like that. They're native to the land, Native Americans. That is a proud thing to be. I'm a proud Native American. Well, partially, a small portion. But I still take pride in my Native American side. So I'm going to tell you a little bit of my story. Okay, so this has been passed down from generation to generation. My grandmother wrote it down. She's like one generation away. 2 generations away, but it's like a great-great-grandmother that wrote down her story. Now, she is not actually the 100% indigenous. She is actually indigenous and European born, and I'll tell you how that happened. Okay, so during the Trail of Tears, and we're going to go over that a lot more when we talk about Andrew Jackson, but during the Trail of Tears, you had a lot of the Cherokee who were basically uprooted from Georgia, South Carolina, and Florida area, and they were made to move west. So they picked up their things and started moving west. Well, this was during the winter. A lot of them knew that they were not going to survive. I had 2 grandmothers in the Trail of Tears. Now, they were not grandmothers at the time. They were not middle-aged at the time. They weren't even toddlers at the time. Well, okay, maybe they were toddlers. They were infants to toddlers. And because their parents did not believe they'd actually survive, or there's a possibility they did not survive, they actually passed them off to European families that they knew they could trust. This is actually, they knew some white families, some European families that they could trust with their babies. And pretty much there's good reason why they could trust them, or at least they have good results from being able to trust them. I'm one of those results. I'm actually partially Native American and partially European. What's interesting about it is I actually had both sides during this time. So my great-grandparents were in the Trail of Tears, but like I was saying, it wasn't just, I'm not even saying just Europeans. My great-great-great-grandfather was Andrew Jackson. So I had both Cherokee and Andrew Jackson. Now, Andrew Jackson is getting the credit for displacing the Native Americans, but actually there's a lot more to the story. Really quick, I'm going to go over just a really small portion of it, because a group of Cherokee saw the writing on the wall. They were not willing to let their people die from any more wars between the Americans and the Cherokees. They went into a treaty. Now, not a large percentage of the Cherokee Nation actually agreed with them, and they were not the officials from the Cherokee Nation. They were not actually in charge. They didn't actually have the right to do this. But they signed over a portion of the land, or actually all of it, for a certain amount of money for the Cherokee Nation, not for them, in order to displace them. So they knew that they were going to have to move. Well, the Cherokee Nation would not move. And they wouldn't move. And they wouldn't move, which I can understand. But at one point, Andrew Jackson basically says, well, we have given you plenty of warning, and this is the date when we said you had to move by, so you're moving, and the military is going to make sure that you move. And that was during the winter. And it was a very grueling winter, and a large amount of Cherokee passed away during that move. So, very, very sad. But one silver lining is that because of this move, 2 children were placed with families that were able to be, that grew up, had families of their own, and so forth, and I'm born. So out of every disaster, there can be small silver linings. I'm hoping that I'm one of them. I don't know. We'll find out. And you trollers would probably say, "Oh, it's horrible that you're alive. You should be dead because there should not have been a trail of tears." True, there should not have been a trail of tears. But because there was, there are some things that actually come out of evil things. We'll just put it that way. How about that? Does that work? Okay. So today we're going to be talking about the impact of the formation of the United States, as I said, and how the Native Americans did a few things. 1, resist. 2, adapt. And 3, preserve their culture during the westward expansion. Again, on Monday, we talked about how there was expansion westward. The British were doing it. And of course, as the United States formed, of course, they were going to go west. They couldn't go north because that was Canada and that was owned by the British. They couldn't go south because that was the Gulf. It took them a while to go into Florida, where the Spanish owned it, basically. But they went west. Now, they could only go a certain amount of distance west because then it was French land, which actually was not French land, it was Spanish land, because the French actually gave them over after the French and Indian War. Then they took it back during Napoleon, and at some point it becomes the Louisiana Purchase. So they had a certain line that they go to, which is basically the Mississippi River. So they pushed and pushed and pushed until the Native Americans were to the point where they actually had to cross over the Mississippi River and go somewhere else. This is well before the Trail of Tears, so sorry if I got you a little confused when I told my story. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about the Native Americans and the formation of the United States. How different tribes basically allied with them, or even resisted them, and so forth. The next part we're going to be talking about is also very important: cultural resilience and adaptation to the westward expansion. How did these indigenous people, these indigenous nations, how do they fight to preserve their culture and the sovereignty of their nations? We're going to go over all of this today. So, thanks so much for joining us for this. Let's start off with, again, what's the biggest part? Native Americans and the formation of the United States. That's where we're going to start. So, the American Revolution, 1775 to 1783. All that land before 1775 was owned by the British. Because the British owned it, there was a lot of conflict between the Native Americans who believed that should have been their land or that did not want them to expand westward. Many tribes during the American Revolution, they tried to stay out of the war. They wanted to stay neutral. But some of them said, well, we have to side with one of them because one of them is going to win. And if they win, we want to keep our land. We want to be on the best side of the people with the guns. You've heard that before, right? Yeah. So there were the Iroquois Confederacy. They were split. Some sided with the British, like the Iroquois, and some sided with the Americans, with the colonists. So you had on the British side, you had the Mohawks, the Seneca, the Cayuga, and the Onondaga. On the American side, or the colonist side, you had the Oneida, which is different than the Onondaga, and then you also had the Tuscarora. Now, you also had the Shawnee and the Cherokee who allied with the British. They were not in the Iroquois Confederacy, but they sided with the British because they believed that they were bigger, stronger, more well prepared, and they were going to stop the American expansion westward. Now, even if the British did win, the British would have moved west as well. It's almost undeniable because all the people wanted to move west. So now there were other nations that basically said, we're not fighting with either side. We are going to stay neutral during this. This included the Creek, the Chickasaw, and the Chickasaw. They fought on both sides, or depending on the battles, or they stayed neutral. So now the consequences of this, During the Treaty of Paris, it officially ended the war. It did not include Native American nations. Even though they fought with the British and the Americans, that was not part of the Treaty of Paris. So the new U.S. government viewed the Native Americans as defeated British allies, those that fought with the British, and basically stripped them of their land. Now, again, the natives decided to side with the British. They knew what the consequences were going to be if they sided with the British. The other ones, knew that if the Americans lost, that they were basically signing over their land. So that's what the big question was. Which side were they going to settle on? And those that lost in the American Revolution, those who were on the British side, lost their land. They were stripped from their lands, done, gone. Now the settlers began to flood into the Native American lands west of the Appalachians, which is basically the Appalachians is what the marker was at that time of the American Revolution. And this led to even more conflicts. People moved into Tennessee. It was great land. Though the indigenous that were there did not like that they were past the Appalachians, because they believed that was the end ground. We gave up our land. We took this land. That's the end. Appalachians. But when the Americans started crossing over, there was a lot of conflicts. Many indigenous nations actually continued to fight and protect their homeland well into mid-1800s. There was one last fight. It was during the time of Grover Cleveland. It was Grover Cleveland. His second, or maybe it was Harrison, right after Grover Cleveland, between Grover Cleveland's two presidencies. It might have been right around there, but it was around that time, around near the middle to end of the 1800s. So the early U.S. policy towards the Native Americans, this is something that's very important. The new U.S. government, just formed, saw Native Americans as basically an obstacle to Western expansion. So they pushed and pushed and pushed until they moved them out. So the Northwest Indian War was between 1785 and 1795. It's basically a coalition of tribes fought against the American settlers and then had to fight against the American army. But they were defeated during the Battle of Fallen Timber. This was 1794. Okay, the Treaty of Greenville. Now this one's interesting. The Treaty of Greenville in 1795 basically forced the tribes to cede huge portions of their land, to give up. Now, if you remember, Ohio Valley was actually part of the French and Indian War. You had the British settlers trying to go into the Ohio Valley, and they fought back. Well, during the Treaty of Greenville, 1795, over 100 years later, Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois basically became states. It basically came over to the United States, and then they made them states. So they're completely protected by the U.S. government. Continued to move north, or move west. Then there was the Indian Removal Act. Yes, that is actually a bill, the Indian Removal Act. So that is actually a word that we constantly use in our government, at least. It would later push natives out of their communities and even further west. So they're just continuing to push them further west. Okay. Sorry, I got an itch in my nose. I got a scratch. Okay. From the very beginning of the United States, Native Americans were forced into basically an impossible choice. They could stay and possibly be wiped out, or resist and a lot of them would die, or they could move. Well, there was one other choice that they had, and some of them took this way, and they actually started to live among the states, in the states. And this was adapting. Some of them actually adapted into this. So let's go into that. Let's talk about the cultural resistance and the adaptation to the westward expansion. So as the United States expanded westward in the 19th century, so the 1800s, the indigenous nations, the Native Americans, I'm going to call them Native Americans from now on, faced relocation, war, and cultural suppression. That did not change. But they also showed remarkable resilience. they began to adapt to the culture of the United States and started living among the states. So this preserved some of them from having to move west, but those that did resist, they were eventually pushed west. Okay, so let's go to 1800s. Okay, so Tecumseh is a Shawnee leader. He formed an alliance of Native American tribes, a large alliance. And he basically fought alongside the British during the War of 1812. Again, another time when they're trying to side with the British because they think they're going to win. They were hoping to preserve their permanent native homeland. They're trying to stay together, and they were trying to keep that land that they were in right then. But after Tecumseh, after his death in 1813, the resistance weakened. It deteriorated. It went away. But the fighting continued. So they continued to fight during that point for only a few more years. Now, there's also the Seminole Wars between 1817 and 1858. Seminoles were down in Florida. They're very well respected down in Florida now. But the Seminoles resisted as well. They resisted removal for decades. And how could they? Because Florida, you might know it as being a land that's beautiful and fresh and not as much water per se, minus the lakes. It was basically all swamp. The Seminoles knew how to live there. The Americans did not. And they fought basically 3 large wars against the U.S., with some escaping into the Everglades to stay away from the Americans. Some were relocated and some were killed. Now, I've already talked to you about the Trail of Tears, my own story. This was part of the Indian Removal Act in 1830. This led to the forced removal to the Indian Territories, which is now Oklahoma. The Cherokee, the Creek, the Chickasaw, the Choctaw, and the Seminoles were forced out of their homelands and into this reservation area in Oklahoma, or around Oklahoma, I should say. Now, the Trail of Tears was 1838 until 1839, and there, thousands of Cherokee died. Now, despite all of this, many Native communities rebuilt their nations in these new lands. They grew up. They were able to become resilient again. And what did they do? They began to, there were some that adapted to states and actually lived among the U.S. citizens and became American citizens per se, just living among the states. But there were some that could not. They moved out to these new lands and they began to adapt. The Cherokee actually created its own constitution, not just a constitution, but its own newspaper and in their own language, which actually was not an ancient language. It was a recent language at this time. You also had the Osage Nation. Osage Nation. They established schools and businesses in the Cherokee territories. So they found this place, which was very alien to them, very foreign to them, because they were like, the Seminoles were very used to swampland down in Florida, or the Cherokee that were used to a lot of trees. Oklahoma, not so many trees. They all had to adapt to this area, but they had to preserve the number one thing. Now, like I said, every single time, their advancements are very advanced for their survival. And so their survival instinct was now to, because they couldn't fight the Americans, it was to preserve their traditions. And many indigenous nations continue to practice their ceremonies even today. Ceremonies, languages, arts, writing, all these things. Even though the government basically pushed them into this area. Now, there's one thing this is really cool. It's called the Ghost Dance Movement. The Ghost Dance Movement, it was about the 1880s, was a religious revival among the Plain nations. And this was inspired to help better their future. This was a creation of a way to preserve their culture. So look that up. I'm not going to go too much into it. So look that one up. There's also the modern resistance movement. Okay. This was even in the 20th century and even the 21st century, Native nations had begun to fight back for their land, their rights, and their recognition. Interesting enough. Okay, so you have some Native American tribes. I'll give you one example. This one's a great example. The NFL, or the NBA, and the MBA, the AMB. Sorry, American baseball. Yes, the baseball. Oh, come on. American Baseball Association. No, it's not the ABA. Anyways. Okay, so you know the mascots. This happened just a few years ago. Not too long ago, 10 years ago. Now, this has been fun for a little while, but it really came to a peak about 10 years ago. At this point, you had a lot of Native American tribe names or descriptions in the mascots of these sports teams. There were the Redskins. There were the Braves. There were the Indians. There were the, and so on and so forth. And there's all these different names. Now, there was this big movement on the left. A lot of Democrats, a lot of progressives said, that's racist. You can't do that. Interesting, isn't it? A lot of those nations actually liked it. Braves. Why would that be insulting at all? They were honoring Native Americans for being brave. Yeah. So there's this modern resistance movement, which is basically things that very progressive people decide, hey, we need to resist. We need to take back some of our rights. Now, this was not all Native Americans. This is actually a small group of them that actually fought some of these names, these mascot names. Now, yes, there were probably some that were not as highly looked over, but even Redskins, there was a lot of people that wanted to keep the Redskins. There was the Braves, people wanted to keep the Braves. The Indians, people wanted to keep the Indians. And what was it? Washington became the Washington Commanders. Woohoo! They were actually something else before that, like the Washington team. What idiot wants that kind of name for a baseball, football, whatever team? So there were so many different names that become controversial, and they had to remove them. This is the same kind of movement, the same type of people that were moving out, like getting rid of these Civil War heroes. Now, interesting enough, we don't celebrate General Lee for being a Confederate, for believing in slavery, because actually he didn't believe in slavery. And yet, because he was a Confederate, they had to topple his statue. He did not believe in slavery. He believed in states' rights, and he was from a southern state, which is the only reason. He had loyalty to the state. It was not loyalty to slavery. That is proven 100%. And so this movement has said, we need to get rid of any kind of resemblance of this. But here's the problem. Okay, what did Germany do? Okay, Germany after World War II. I've been there. I've talked to people about it, and they do not ever want to mention Hitler and what Hitler did. And what Hitler, anything that has to do with Hitler, the Germans do not want to talk about it. Why not? Because they're embarrassed by what Hitler did. He did evil things, and a lot of them backed it. Not people today, but people in the past. They backed it. What's happening right now? Same type of dictation. No more freedom. You can't speak. You cannot speak your mind. You cannot do this and that and this and that. They're destroying the people. Again, they're taking away their rights. They're indoctrinating them however they want to. That's exactly how Germany was taken over by Hitler. They took away the rights for people to fight back. What's happening now? They took away their freedom of speech. You cannot demonize a politician. Hitler was a politician, and you couldn't fight back against it? You're doing the exact same thing you already did. Learn from history. Please stop that. Bring back freedom of speech in Germany. But the same thing happened. Same thing happened in the United States. We're trying to take away people's freedom because of something that happened in the past. Sorry, when you do that, you destroy things. When you destroy things, we end up repeating things. You're not progressing forward, you're falling backwards. Okay, I'm off that rant. Okay, so despite centuries of displacement, Native American tribes survived, they adapted, and they continued to fight for their sovereignty. Now, they still do it today. Now, there's a difference between what I was just talking about, the progressive movement in some of these sovereign movements, and what some of the nations are doing to try to rebuild their traditions. The problem is, sorry to say, a lot of the children, a lot of the younger people are leaving the nations. They're leaving the tribes. When they leave the tribes, they can't pass down the traditions. So they're struggling. I'm also very familiar with the Blackfoot over in Idaho. Great tribe. But they're having issues. I have actually someone in my life who, and I'm not mentioning any connections, but that person in my life adopted 4 children from the Blackfoot tribe, and the Blackfoot tribe is not very happy or friendly to them, some of them. They're trying to keep them in the traditions. They keep bringing them to the tribe to be able to learn things, and they see all this resistance, even though they're trying to keep the children in the tribe to learning the tribal cultures and such. So this movement sometimes is hurting itself more than it's helping. Okay, I'm off that. So many stories of resistance, cultural strength, and enduring identity, though it's falling apart right now. It's having a hard time right now. So let's recap some of the things we talked about today. Okay, first off, from the American Revolution to westward expansion, Native Americans were pushed off their land, and they never stopped trying to fight the people that were pushing them out. They tried to keep their culture and also their future. During the founding of the United States, Native Americans, their tribes, played key roles in the wars. War of 1812, they were there. American Revolution, they were there. A lot of different wars, they were there. World War II, that's right. The Code Breakers, there was actually a group of Code Breakers that were Native Americans. I think it was Navajo. We'll get into that when we get to World War II. They played a great role, and they've had a lot of diplomacy and also treaties. Some treaties that they were left out of as well, as we know from the Treaty of Paris in 1783. I think it was that. Yeah. Okay. As settlers moved west, the native communities faced basically removal or war, and of course, with that, broken promises. Yet they continue to resist and continue to keep their culture and traditions. Continue to try as much as possible they could. Now, despite these hardships, the indigenous cultures, they kept their language, their traditions, and survived today. So this is great. I've got one action question for you. It's very important. What do you think is the most overlooked story of the Native American resistance? Last time it was the ancient Native Americans. Here, what is the most overlooked story in the resistance? And maybe I'll expand it. Not just resistance, resilience. We'll just make it resilience because that's a lot more information. What is the most overlooked story in the Native American resilience? To keep their tribe, to keep their land, to keep their ideas and everything flowing. I'd love to hear what you have to say. Please put them in the comments below. If you're Native American, please share your story. Not your story. Well, your story would be great, but the story of your ancestors. Love to hear them. Put them in the comments below, or email me if you don't want to share it to the rest of the world. I'd love to hear about it. If you have any questions, concerns, thoughts when it comes to this podcast, please share those as well. Email me. historicalconquest@gmail.com is the fastest way to get to me. Until next time, thank you so much for joining us, and we will catch you next time. That'd be actually tomorrow. So, as we talk more about the ancient Greeks. So, talk to you soon. Take care. Bye. If you have any comments or questions, add them to the comments below. Otherwise, we'll see you tomorrow, actually. Take care. Bye.